President of HOA wants me to join, ends up wanting to leave the country. Posted by Also Not the Mama. This is about a property that OP owns and rents out. The background. A million years ago, my property was part of a large farm. I bought it about 30 years ago, long after the farm was broken up, but before there was any development near it. The piece of land that I got was near the back entrance that joined into a dirt road that ran past. The more expensive plots were near the tarred road in the front. I originally bought a large chunk of the land intending to do some farming, but that never happened. About 20 years ago, some of the owners got organized, we'll call them the Organized Owners, OO, and had the area designated as a municipal suburb. The municipality agreed to put in tarred roads, water, and electricity if a certain percentage of the properties were developed. A construction company linked to the OO went around contacting the owners who had land but no buildings, offering to build houses for us at a very, very reasonable price, contingent on them getting a certain minimum amount of people signing up. While this was happening, one of the OO approached me and offered to buy half of my property. I agreed, and the money I got for the sale, which was about 4 times what I'd paid for the entire chunk of land 10 years prior, combined with the small loan from the bank, gave me what I needed to pay for a house to be built, and it was a fairly large and nice house too. I stayed in the house for a few years, and my mom moved in with me. I had decided to subdivide the property again and build her a house next to mine. But unfortunately, an undiagnosed tumor took her before the house could even be started. Well, it was diagnosed, but too late to do anything. Soon after she died, we moved out of the house and started renting it out. About a few weeks before we moved out, the OO I'd sold the land to started talking about starting an HOA. I was not interested, and I left soon after. About 2 years later, the neighbor OO contacted me. There were 2 roads entering the area these days. The original tarred road that was near where the farmhouse had been and was entered from a fairly busy main road, and my dirt road back entrance, which was now a tarred entrance from a wide but not very busy municipal road. The HOA was trying to get the old farm road blocked off to improve security and decrease through traffic, and wanted the road next to my property to be the main and only entrance to the HOA community. And they were pressuring me to join. I said no, and I was adamant, and eventually they accepted that. But they told me they wanted to have a sign near the road welcoming people to the neighborhood, and the only practical place to put it was on the edge of my property. They also wanted to build a little guard hut and have a security guard permanently monitoring who went in and who came out, and they wanted to build his shed on my property. We came to an agreement whereby they would mow the lawn and pay the equivalent of about $35 per month in exchange for the land that they needed. I was very happy with this arrangement since the property was fairly large and it didn't really cost them anything since they already had a full-time gardening service servicing the HOA. This all happened over a decade ago. They eventually got the other main road blocked off, and the HOA is paying for a rent-a-cop to be permanently stationed close to my property, as well as mowing the lawn and paying me enough money for takeaways for the family each month. I'm occasionally contacted by members of the HOA to get me to sign up, but I'm really not interested. My property has been rented to the same tenant for all these years, and everything there is going well for me. Until about 3 years ago, when someone scared the crap out of my tenant's young daughter by making strange noises and shooting a gun close to her bedroom window 3 or 4 times over about a month. This scared my tenant, and I guess it scared the HOA because they and my tenant contacted me with a proposal. I joined the HOA, and they give me exclusions from the HOA rules, including exclusions from paying the monthly fees, and in addition, they will build a wall around the entire HOA neighborhood, including electric fencing and security cameras. They told me they had wanted to do this for a while, but they were unwilling to build the wall on property that was not in the HOA. I couldn't see the downside, so I agreed. The dishonest dealings. It took a little over a year to build that wall and get everything completed, which, well, it's quite fast. And then a month to the day after everything was done, my tenant got an HOA warning about his dogs barking. He told the HOA that while the property was in the HOA, it was exempt from the rules. The HOA told him that they had canceled the exemptions and that he had 30 days to comply. He contacted me, and I opened some mail I'd gotten from the HOA, which I'd ignored it since I was supposed to be exempt from the rules and the fees. Oh man, did I get a surprise. They had retroactively canceled the exemptions, and they were claiming this. 1. That I pay late fees going back over a year. 2. That the easement agreement had been canceled, and they were retroactively canceling it a year back because the HOA contract allowed them to use, quote, small unused portions, end quote, of HOA members' land for the common good for free. 3. That I refund them the money that they had paid for the easement over that period. And 4. That I owed them money for the garden service mowing the large lawn. And 5. That I would be fined for each infraction that my tenant failed to remedy. This started an expensive process involving lawyers in the court system that ended with the judge telling me what the HOA had done was, well, mostly legal. They had the right to revoke the exemptions, but that they had to give me 30 days notice. As I was walking to my car, the neighbor OO, the one who had bought half of my land so many years ago, told me that I was stupid to have refused to join when the HOA started, as I could have been a founder member, whatever that means, and that the next time I should be sure to understand the documents that I sign before signing them. The malicious compliance. Neighbor OO was right. I should have read the contract better. Also, I was interested in what it meant to be a founding member. Spoiler, nothing. So when I got home, I grabbed the HOA contract that I'd signed, as well as all the other documentation they'd provided me with. I started reading. I was determined to break every rule I could find a loophole to break. I didn't get past the first page. While the street address of the property is used to identify it for all practical purposes, in the city records it has to be a unique property number that has to be used on legal records. When my mom moved in, I'd subdivided the remaining property, but I hadn't yet started building on it. And when I gave the HOA the easement all those years ago, it had been on the property that I'd sliced off for my mom. And when the HOA set up the contract, they had simply used the property number from the easement. The next afternoon, the neighbor OO delivered and had me sign for 2 documents. One telling me that my exemptions would expire in 30 days, and one letting me know that the easement would no longer be required after 30 days. I think he was being a bit malicious here, because I lived about an hour away from the property and he drove out himself. The revenge. Exactly 30 days to the hour after the HOA had given me the 30 days notice, I knocked on the neighbor OO's door. Did I mention he was the president of the HOA? And had him sign for the 2 documents. The first was that I planned to build a house on my HOA property, which confused him. And the second was notice that they had 30 days to remove from the property the guard shed, the parts of the electric boom that were on my property, as well as the sign. He tried to engage me, but I ignored him, climbed into my car, and I drove off. Early the next morning, I got a call from the HOA lawyer who explained to me that their junk would be staying on my property since it was in an unused part of my land. I explained that I was building a house there and that the land would not be unused anymore. I could hear the smirk as he told me that building a second house to be spiteful would not be accepted by the courts. I sure hoped that he could hear the smirk in my voice when I told him that the property in question did not have a house and was, in fact, barely large enough for a house to be built and would not be large enough for any extraneous buildings. I then told him to go look up the property in question and then call me back. I had sliced off just enough to be legal, which was just enough to build a small house. It took them just under 5 days to get back to me. Their lawyer told me that the terms of the easement meant that I could not cancel without their permission, so I emailed him a photo of the document they sent to me canceling the easement. That afternoon, neighbor OO invited me to lunch, his treat, to discuss the problem. I said, nah thanks. He extended the offer again 2 days later, and again I said, no thanks. Others of the original OO contacted me to try to talk. Some sounded aggressive, some sounded sympathetic. I said, no thanks, to each of them. Eventually, the lawyer phoned and asked if we could come to some sort of agreement. I asked what he had in mind, and he told me that he was prepared to discuss exclusions in exchange for access to my property. So I said, no thanks, and please don't call me again. About 9 days before their 30 days was up, I got a call from a different lawyer. He said he wanted to negotiate a surrender, his words, not mine, and I agreed to meet him at his office the next day. I'd already had documents drawn up, and the meeting was as simple as me giving him the documents and him reading them over. My new easement offer was: 1. Included everything offered by the old easement offer. 2. I changed the line "mow the lawn" to "get the property to HOA standards and keep it there," since it was, well, now in the HOA. 3. Would cost them about $500 per month instead of $35. And 3A, this amount would increase with inflation. Now, the previous contract didn't include that bit. Now, when canceled for whatever reason, the HOA would have to pay me a cancellation fee of around $7,500. And the contract automatically terminated 30 days after any disciplinary action was taken against me, my tenant, or the property, known as the property, or any complaints were levied by the HOA against the property, or any legal action was taken against the property by anyone in the HOA. The next thing was that the lawyer who had offered the negotiate surrender would be allowed to mediate any disputes between us at the HOA's expense. And the seventh thing, the HOA would pay all of my legal fees if any legal action was taken against me. I deliberately left some insane things in there so that I could appeal to concede some points or be negotiated down when the HOA got indignant about the points that I actually cared about. The lawyer did not look happy. He said that my proposal sounded unfair, but that he'd have the HOA president look at them. I reminded him that in 8 days, I'd be setting a group of men armed with sledgehammers and anger management issues loose on whatever of theirs was still on my property. That evening, I got an irate call from the HOA president. He told me he was never going to sign the new contract. I said, okay. He then told me I was charging too much per month and that it should be at the same rate as the previous contract. I pointed out that when I signed the previous contract, the area was under development and there was at least one other road leading in and out, but that now there was only mine. And besides, mine was now developed with everything they needed. He told me that I was forcing them to sign a document they didn't want to sign. Well, I told him that he was free to just not sign it. He whined about anything and everything that he could think of, and then eventually told me I'd be hearing from his lawyer. The next morning, Surrender Lawyer called to ask if I'd be willing to come to their offices to sign the contract. I agreed. When I got there that afternoon, I learned that Surrender Lawyer was not a lawyer, but a paralegal. He handed me the contract and asked me to sign it. He laughed when I told him that I'd have to read through it first to make sure nothing was changed, and mumbled something that sounded like, "I'm sure you would." I read the contract. Nothing had been changed. Not a single thing. And the HOA president had signed it, with the surrender paralegal signing as witness. I looked at him and said, "Why did he sign this? It was stupid to sign it." And the paralegal looked at me and said, "I started telling him that signing it would be a bad decision, but he told me that I wasn't being paid to think or give legal advice and to shut up. So I shut up." I said, "Do you understand what he signed here?" He looks at me and nods. He said, "I asked him if I should have one of the lawyers look at it before giving it to you, and he told me that we'd already built enough for this, and that he'd sign it and then sue me after their easement was safe." This happened about 1.5 years ago. It took 6 months for the HOA to find out how screwed they were. They wanted to sue me, but their lawyers explained to them that there was no way to win. Even if the court sided with them, all they would get is the easement contract voided, and they did not think that the court would side with them. The lawyers were adamant about one thing. The HOA could not live with the HOA pays my legal fees if legal action was taken against me, since it didn't limit the people taking legal action against me to the HOA. As worded, the HOA would be forced to pay my legal fees if anyone took legal action against me. They argued that the courts would probably not enforce that, since the context of the agreement was to do with the HOA. And I told them I was prepared to find out, since the HOA would definitely be the ones taking action against me if they challenged it. I eventually signed an addendum to the contract that said that the neighbor OO, the HOA president, would personally pay all my legal fees unless he held no position at all in the HOA, and that the HOA would pay all legal fees if the HOA took legal action against me. He resigned from the HOA at the end of that meeting. I politely told him in front of everyone that he should not sign documents unless he understands what he's signing. He didn't look pleased at all. It came out during the mediation. You cannot imagine how happy the lawyers were that their paralegal was mediating, that without the ability to control access to the HOA neighborhood through the security boom partially on my property, remember the HOA had become a gated community a number of years back, the HOA would be in breach of their own articles and would be dissolved. I also learned, and it should have been obvious to me, that all the security cameras were wired and all terminate in the guardhouse and guard shed. So basically, it was my way or the end of the HOA. That first mediation was really quite funny. My paralegal looked more than a little glum as we assembled and he called everyone to order. I suspected that he had been told to work against me, so I took the initiative. I reminded everyone there that I had agreed to let paralegal mediate, but that I had agreed to no arbitration at all. If I didn't feel like the proceedings were fair, I'd leave and they could go ahead and just sue. Paralegal brightened up and things actually went quite well. I'm writing this after getting home from the latest mediation. I built a paddling pool for the neighborhood dogs, as in I made it myself. I dug a hole, packed it with stone, and added a concrete finish. It was my first attempt, and if I say so myself, it looked, well, terrible. The HOA called for a mediation meeting, what they do now, instead of taking official action. I've declined their mediation request in the past, in which they told me, as nicely as they could, that the paddling pool was an eyesore right at the entrance of the HOA. I asked them to create a list of what needed to be fixed and how it needed to be fixed to give me at the next meeting. The list was extensive. It basically required the pool to be rebuilt from scratch. I asked them if there was any way to reduce the cost on the work they needed to get it up to HOA standards, and they assured me that there was not. I thanked them, pulled out a copy of the agreement where they had agreed to, quote, get the property to HOA standards, end quote, which I had highlighted, and then handed it to them with the list. I told them the HOA usually preferred if these things were dealt with within 30 days. They started arguing until the mediator reminded them that they could not force me to comply without causing the easement to end. I should mention that their lawyers usually no longer attend these things. They said they would get it done. I also learned a lot about neighbor OO today. For one, I found out that neighbor OO sold his property about 3 months back and is apparently leaving the country for Australia. Next, I found out that the HOA had successfully sued him for a crap load of money that they had lost to his mismanagement as part of his vendetta against me. 3, I also learned that he had a vendetta against me. I have no idea what I did to upset him. I'm not sure if I'll screw with the HOA anymore. I already think I'm so close to breaking them, the only thing stopping them from canceling the contract is the massive financial loss if they do. I guess a lot depends on how they treat me and my tenants going forward. Also, I do like the monthly payments though, so I'm motivated to play nice. Our neighbors are an absolute nightmare. Is our HOA genuinely not doing their job, or am I being impatient? Posted by the drunkest kook. For context, we built a new home and moved in fall 2022. Prior to this, our now next door neighbors finished their home and moved in a couple weeks before us. We'd occasionally go visit our home as it was under construction and immediately noticed our next door neighbors put an old chicken coop and a disabled SUV in their backyard. The chickens are unbelievably loud and they squawk at all hours of the day. Along with this, there was a ton of general trash and clutter, tarps and scrap wood, plastic bins, and so on. We were initially panicked but thought that they would eventually get this cleaned up as they settled into their home during the coming months, as we knew the HOA CC&Rs allowed none of this. The HOA also requires all initial landscaping to be completed within 3 months of ownership, so we thought that they'd be starting that process as well. Nope, never happened. Only became worse. Throughout the rest of the year, we were reasonably preoccupied settling into our home, and then winter came where there isn't really any good reason to be enjoying your backyard in 5-degree weather. We knew the issues at our neighbor's house persisted, but assumed that they'd be getting things cleaned up in the spring. As 2023 rolled around, nothing at all was done. We tend to take a very live and let live approach to things, and we know our neighbors have several children, so we gave them the benefit of the doubt and assumed that they would start cleaning things up eventually. In late March of 2023, 2 of their kids were climbing on the large rock retaining wall that we have in our front yard. Wanting to keep my home insurance premiums low and not wanting one of them to fall and injure themselves, I went outside and I politely asked them to stay off of the rock wall. The very next day, I hear a loud commotion out front and I go outside to see what's going on. The same 2 kids have pulled roughly 30 rocks out of the retaining wall and thrown them onto the ground. Much sterner, I tell them to put the rocks back immediately and stay off of the wall. As I'm walking back inside, I realize their mother is on the front porch. I was honestly so stunned that she'd let her kids do that and I couldn't even just say anything. At that point, as said, enough is enough. We're reporting everything to the HOA. I called the HOA and reported the 9 violations in total. The HOA said that other people in the neighborhood complained several times about this house and stated that our next door neighbors always talked about how busy they were or how some last-minute emergency came up every time they were notified of a violation. I asked the HOA about timelines, and they walked me through the process of letters and warnings, final warnings and fines. It seemed like stuff should at least be improving within 6 to 8 weeks at the very latest. Fast forward about 2 months to the end of May. Nothing at all has changed, and the chickens are loud as ever. I called the HOA to get an update, and I learned that they had my complaints on file, but nothing had been done about them as the person who took my complaints had recently resigned. They say they will start working on these issues, and I reaffirmed the 6 to 8 week timeline to begin seeing improvements. I also sent them video clips of the chickens and all the noise that they make, several clips from several different days, along with photos of the status of the property. In the meantime, the neighbors park a recreational vehicle in their backyard as well, also not allowed per the HOA CC&Rs. Skip ahead to July. Minimal progress has been made. The truck had been moved to the front of their house and was illegally parked over the sidewalk. This is now 2 violations. You can't have a disabled vehicle viewable from any lot, and any vehicles must be parked in accordance with county laws. The only other change was that they brought a landscaper out to regrade their backyard because, as they stated to the HOA, the land developer had ruined the initial grading with their equipment, so therefore they couldn't begin landscaping their backyard. I can promise you, the developer never came close to this lot. Anyways, still no progress, and the chickens continue making noise endlessly. I contact the HOA again, and their COO assures me that they're working on these violations, and they stated that our neighbors moved into a neighborhood with an HOA and will need to follow the regulations. My initial thoughts were that we're finally going to get this whole mess cleaned up, and we'll be able to enjoy our back patio in some peace and quiet. Again, nothing happens, so I follow up in an email with new chicken videos and I simply ask what date I could expect this issue to be resolved. The response I received was the complete opposite of what had been previously communicated and contradictory to what is in the HOA CC&Rs. I asked for clarification. They stated that they're in violation due to an unapproved structure, the noise the chickens make, and the waste they produce, but there isn't anything explicitly stating that chickens aren't allowed. Don't get me wrong, I am fine if our neighbors have chickens, but I don't want to have to deal with the byproduct of their chicken ownership. If they have a soundproof and HOA compliant structure that they keep the chickens in, that is completely fine with me. Another couple of weeks go by, into early August now, and I ask two questions. What date the neighbors have been given to reach compliance and what options they've been given. No response. So I wait a week and I send another email. No response. I wait another week and I follow up, and I finally get a response at 5 p.m. on a Friday that doesn't answer either of the questions. Just standard boilerplate, "Oh, we understand how frustrating this must be for you," and blah blah blah. So I follow up the next week and basically saying, "Hey, thanks for getting back to me, but I'm just hoping to get clarifications on my two questions." No response. I wait another week and follow up again. No response. I wait another week and I follow up again, and today and finally get a response from the CEO just now saying that my emails, once a week at the most, are bordering on harassment, that they have no updates on resolving the chicken issue, and that he is instructing his staff to ignore communications from me until they have an update. They won't tell me what progress they've made, what stage they're on, if they're dining our neighbors, and so on. Keep in mind, this is only related to the chickens, as they are far and away the biggest nuisance. No dialogue or discourse has occurred regarding any of the other violations since June. We are absolutely exacerbated and exhausted. What is my recourse here? Do I need to get an attorney involved? Am I being a Karen? Now, there isn't a board affiliated with this HOA, and it's just a property management company that runs several HOAs. The annual board meetings are the executives from the HOA company and the land developer. Do you agree with this comment and OP's response? Now that I think about it, if you throw up a fuss that causes new owners to not want to buy, the management company will be more motivated to do something. Oh yeah, that is an interesting idea, OP says. The real challenge in this is that we are the only people who are affected by them, so no other neighbors really understand what's going on. There are no houses behind us or on the opposite of them. And by and large, the average property value in the neighborhood is over $1.5 million, so people tend to take exceptional care of their property. Except these people. I really don't understand. How do you think OP could escalate this? Let me know what you think. Terrible HOA President Storytime by Root Investigator 6630. My HOA president does not like me. For a year, we were lied to about something that was not in the CC&Rs. They maintained the old documents that were no longer applicable on the HOA website to justify their ACC denials. A year after I was denied a particular improvement, I mentioned to the ACC that I would be submitting a request for some projects, including the one I was verbally denied of a year ago. I was told that as long as a previously denied improvement was XYZ per the covenants, I was approved. The HOA president started calling my contractor and harassing them about one of my projects, telling them I had not been approved even though I had written approval. I found out in the process of doing my other project, the one that was denied last year due to it conflicting with our covenants, that the previously denied project should have never been denied because it was not restricted in our covenants. Once I found that out, I told my contractor to alter it so that a portion of the project was no longer XYZ, but XY. I've received a letter from their lawyer stating that I need to remove that portion of my improvement, which is not XYZ, because that's not what I got approved for. I don't feel I should remove it because I was lied to for a year about a restriction in our covenants that does not exist. Do I have an argument? I'm trying not to give any identifying information since some of my neighbors use Reddit, so I'll use this explanation. I submitted a request for a concrete driveway. I was asked what kind of concrete I would be using, and I told them regular concrete. I was then told that I couldn't use regular concrete for my driveway because the CC&R state that you can only do an exposed aggregate driveway. When I went to check the CC&Rs, it also confirmed what the ACC had said about exposed aggregate driveways being the only kind of driveway permitted. We went to speak with the board, but they denied our appeal, saying that we had to follow the CC&Rs. We even went as far to ask if the portion of the driveway that couldn't be seen from the street could be regular concrete because we really needed a driveway and couldn't afford a completely exposed aggregate driveway. We were still told no, because we needed to follow the CC&Rs. In order to save up more money to afford it, we waited a year and mentioned our interest in the driveway again while we were requesting something else. When the ACC came to speak with us, the driveway was brought up and we were approved to proceed with it provided it was exposed aggregate like mentioned in the CC&Rs, and we agreed. After the construction of the driveway began, we found out that the CC&Rs that were mentioned were the wrong CC&Rs and that the only one that was actually in effect was an incomplete copy. It did not show the filing signature and the date that would come up after the old one. I was furious. I'd been lied to and made to incur more money for something that was not in the current CC&Rs. I contacted my contractor and I told him that since we already had the materials, he should make the front portion of my driveway exposed aggregate and to make the back portion transition to regular concrete. I received a letter from the lawyer saying that I have gone against what I was approved for and need to remedy it to fit my approval. Otherwise, they will pursue litigation. Do I have an argument? Just for more insight, other things happened between I and the board that caused unnecessary friction and frustration leading up to the time the driveway was being constructed. Do you agree with this comment? They have to file the latest bylaws and CC&Rs with the state. In New Mexico, it's the AG. If you're in compliance with those, I would think you can tell them to play in a litter box. And this reply is, depends on the state. Mine doesn't require them to get filled anywhere. And OP says, they explicitly told me to refer back to the CC&Rs because that's what tells them what is allowed and isn't, but the CC&Rs state nothing about material. Do you think OP could escalate the lying HOA president and make this thing right again, or what should he do? OP needs to get this in writing too. HOA finds me illegally and breaks the law. I fight back. Here's how. Click the video on your screen. You don't want to miss the crazy story here, and I'll see you there.